We'll start off today again, maybe with a quick presentation of a summary of the chapters that we have read for this week. Yes, if that's okay. So let me start like I did last week with the summary of the Muthulakshmi Reddy book, chapter 2, which is what we read for this week. So give me a second, please, while I bring it up. Okay, so I'm just going to give you, as we did last week, just a sense of what I try to do is just rephrase things, right, in the way that my mind has been able to collect the information from the chapter. So instead of going in the same order as what the author presents, I've just kind of collected it in a different sense, just a different way to look at the material that has the facts, the information that's been given to us. So with chapter 2, the larger sense that I sort of got is chapter 2 is leading us through the life that she led in Madras in the first phase that she was in Madras, which was essentially her medical degree and her education, right, in medicine. And this being clearly her formative years, both as a medical practitioner, but also as a person, because she's still a young person, growing up in the city, open to so many different kinds of influences. So I think the chapter gives us a sense of what were these influences, right? What was this social circle that she was in that finally shaped this person that she became as a professional, right, herself. So just the very quick timelines that sort of I took away in this phase of her stay in Madras was, of course, she arrives in 1907 with her father. That was something we saw in chapter 1 as well, with a very clear intention of being enrolled in the Madras Medical College for a master's in medicine, basically in surgery, for her to do her degree in surgery. And she stays between 1907 and 1915, which is when she not only completes her medical degree, but also gains a lot of work experience in different spheres of medicine, right, of being a house surgeon per se. At the end of the chapter, we're told 1915, she comes back to Pudukkottai with a very specific intention of serving as a medical practitioner in her hometown. But unfortunately, she does not stay behind for very long because her prospects, we are told, were very bleak, given that there was a lot of perhaps internal politics within the medical systems or the people who existed there. So owing to jealousy and things like that, she's not really being able to move forward. So she returns to Chennai in 1917 and establishes a practice in Chennai. So that's kind of the overall timelines that I took away. A lot is told to us in this period, particularly about her domestic life, which is very interesting from several perspectives. For me, of course, from the point of view of how much of a support system that she had, right, specifically from her parents immediately, but also when called upon from the extended family, and largely to make that life in Madras work. Of course, fundamentally for her, but that was a very interesting finding for me, is that also for her siblings. So it wasn't a kind of a situation where she's a particularly bright kid and she was the only one who was exposed to the education. But it was interesting to note that each of her siblings were enrolled at very good, levels of education in Madras. And they, like her youngest sister, then goes on to, again, occupy very important positions in life, including being the first Indian principal of the Queen Mary's College, which is still which is in fact the college that my mom studied in, and is bang opposite to Marina Beach, and still very much is well-known college in Madras. So, and also became a member of the Upper House of Parliament, and so on and so forth. There is mentions that are made of pressure from her mother to continues that she must marry, but that it's just a mention. I hope in later chapters we'll see how that pans out. And there's an expansion on the role of the father, right? And it's interesting that it's not just that he is on the administrative side trying to get her into the colleges or schools, but it talks about how he very much contributes to cooking, caring for his kids, and very actively engaging, particularly with his eldest daughter in, how her day went, what she learned, having conversations with her, and also exposing her to wide range of people from society at that point of time. So those were sort of interesting takeaways for me from the mentions there. Some very pointers to also give us a sense of how the existence of a woman, I think, in this sphere of medicine, of course, a sphere that there is an expansion to show us how few women at that point of time were in the field of medicine to start with, and then particularly being an Indian woman in the field, right? So interesting, there's a lot of support and encouragement that is received from a lot of her professors and the surgeons who are part of the hospitals or the medical college she was at. But there's also a lot of resistance, bullying that also comes from different quarters, right? So it's to sort of understand that not everything was rosy, but there was a good degree of support and a good degree of resistance to someone trying to do something that's very different. A collection of the people, the kind of social circles that she was influenced by at this point of time. I just collected the points here. I won't go through them one at a time. But what was interesting to me is to see that she was clearly exposed to what seems like the cream of society, right? People who are already in very important positions, people who seem to be participating, of course, either in the national movement at that point of time. And MC Nanjunda Rao was a very interesting mention for me, because it talks about how his home was some kind of almost like it seemed like a melting pot of so many people, with Vivekananda visiting, and where Subramanya Bharatiyar actually took refuge for a week, and so on and so forth, right? And how Nanjunda Rao further introduces her to people like Sarojini Naidu, and so on and so forth. So there are the worlds of the national movement, there is the world of medicine and some very influential people from medicine, and there is the world of theosophy, to which she is sort of exposed to in a very intense way during this period. I think that's kind of what we get to learn of. And there's also a lot of people who are very much involved in in the public health sector, and that is another thing. And these are the kind of people that she's kind of around during this period. And the author notes that there are a few very important personal things, right? Family events or personal experiences that influence her decision or keeps her inspired to stay in the medical field and go on with the kind of ventures that she did in life. One, of course, is the mention of the passing away of a very close family member, particularly, and we're just told, it's just a reference that's left at that this was a 16-year-old girl who died at childbirth. And then the mention is that, and therefore the evils of the Devadasi system, or the system of dedication of a girl, was something that she was very much bent against. So my assumption from that is that this girl was somebody who was dedicated to the temple. Of course, there's a mention to her own poor health, poor immunity, prone to asthma, so on and so forth, which according to her reading was this practice of hiring wet nurses, which is another, gives us an insight into also medical health practices that were ongoing at that point of time. And definitely the fact of her exposure to so many different kinds of people, I think, which finally influences the kind of things that she goes on to do in her life. So that's what I have as a summary from the Muthulakshmi Reddy chapter. I will hand it over to Santosh, who will be summarizing the chapter 3, right, of the Nagaratnama.
So the chapter 3 includes a very different perspective of Nagaratna Mama, bringing light of a very beautiful aspect of literature and how she involved within the Telugu literature as a development, which is very interesting because she, being a Kannadiga, having exposure with Tamil for a long period of time, she still found love with Telugu literature and grew along with it. And I think she just not loved the language of Telugu, but she also made sure that she engaged within the poetry and the nuances of it, that it led her to be a part of the group of scholars within that community as well. And by 1910, it was very clear with a lot of her works being appreciated and honors coming in praise of her. She found a role model, which is very, very interesting and a very important aspect of this chapter of Muthupalani, who was apparently a court poetess as well. And she was a part of the Pratap Simha's court in the 18th century of the Maratha ruler of the, who was Maratha ruler of the Tanjavur. And alongside being a court dancer, she was also a scholar in Telugu. So the inspiration that Nagaratna Mama draws was also from that, the conversations that she had within the language that she loved a lot. There is, with this chapter specifically, that I found very interesting was a work that was also referred to, and something that came in full descriptions and understanding, and a work that probably have not reached many of the viewers for a very, very long time, and then coming back to discussion, was Muthupalani Amma's work of Radhika Santvamu. There is this also another very beautiful reference of how she apparently had translated Tithirupavai, but she was not happy, and she's actually kind of redid it as Sapta Padulu, which is like the 7 verses to it. And it is, I can probably share that YouTube link of that. It's a beautiful verse. It's sung by a young musician, and it's very beautifully penned in Telugu, which is very different from the direct translation from Tamil to Telugu. Alongside that main work being Radhika Satpatmam, which was basically the discussion or the center point of discussion, it also describes this work to be one of the very erotic classics written by a woman. And apparently the way she described Krishna, unlike the figure that we look at him, that is somebody who yearns for Krishna, the love of Radha, yearning for Krishna, she had given a total different imagery of Krishna. So the first publishing happened in 1887, and it was also reissued in 1907. The other important was the mention of Veerasalingam, who was apparently the supporter of the anti-Nautch movements and somebody who was against who was against Devadasis and their work and their support. And he used these words called Idi, Adi, Dani, which is a very much local language used towards a women, which shows how he's kind of looked at not just the work, but also the reference of how he thought of Muthupalani. So it just shows how he's probably deemed the author completely down. In this process, Nagaratna Mama apparently notices that not all the verses of what Muthupalani Amma had written were actually published. And then she decided to republish them, which actually paved way for more controversies, more difficulties in her way. So she decides to bring this whole book to entirety in 1910. And in one of the articles, she tells that this book is a very very beautifully written work and overflowing with different emotions and tastes. And it's not just written by a woman, but a woman who's born to the same community as mine. So she refers to the Devadasi community. And hence I intend to publish it and edit it and publish it with that tribe. So the chapter also has a very beautiful way of bringing in the comparisons between male poet work to female poet work, and within how they are supported versus not supported, with errors, without errors. So there's a lot of discussions that we see how they bring this kind of controversies as well in the political scenarios at that time. So it was not just a book that was put into the limelight of being that, oh, it was, the language was bad, the way it was looked at it was bad, but also if it was written by a man, or if it was something that was worked by a man, it would have been looked differently, where some suggestions that were being given by the books, and also articles that kind of had a lot of discussions alongside. So by 1910, the book was released and apparently sold for 6 annas, and which was the price that she had placed for the books. With the all other feedback, what I felt very interesting was the feedback that was there on page 49. And it beautifully says that it just kind of puts me to think that it went out to point that a prostitute composed a book under the name of Radhika Santanam, and the other prostitute corrected errors therein and edited it. And they also said Lord Krishna was also not spared. So the way the book was reviewed showed the way how the literature or the book was even looked at. Obviously, because of the controversies that led, there's a huge position of the government interfering and the chief secretary actually giving way to saying that there has to be a criminal investigation leading towards it. All the publishers needs to be raided. They need to understand what's happening. They need to stop the publishing of the book, editing of the book. And I think by a couple of I think a good number of raids that had been mentioned in this, under 293 IPC, all the copies of the books were destroyed. So the publishing of the book, however, not just stopped, but also on the other side of it, because of Nagaratna Mamma's such a strong-willed movement, I think she also earned a great position within the Poet Society back with a different context. And I think at the end of that chapter is a beautiful way how they kind of describe her being back in the discussions within the Poet Symposiums, and how scholarly discussions actually praised her for the strength that she held against all the fights that she had, and also against Veeresalingam, and everything that she could have undergone with that process of editing and publishing the book. So this chapter for me at least was something not just about Nagaratna Mamma, but also a great discussion about Muthulakshmi, a great discussion about her work, another discussion about how she looked at Tirupavai, not just being a literal translation from Tamil to Telugu, but also how that verses were placed and what were they called. So there were a lot of limelights given into these topics. And I think slowly and steadily, I think there is a copy of Radhika Satsvatmam. I think the discussion of it, at least there is an English translation available now. And I haven't read it, but yes, it is something that I happen to see it, that there is a copy available. So I think it's assuming that there would be a revised version to it. So for me, I think the chapter was much more than about Nagaratna Mamma's position as an editor and a publisher, and trying to bring such an important work, giving way to not just looking at it just as a mere erotic work that has been produced as a poetic descriptions, but also to kind of say that this is how she viewed Krishna, that she gave a different storyline. There was a way of creativity within that space. And to support such a work, to support literature within that perspective, I think that really made a sense of discussion for me there, but also to see how they even compared male poets versus female poets. So in instances, how there were comparisons, how there were support and not supporting. So that's my takeaway for chapter 3. And
Lakshmi, do you want to go on with the next chapter? Yeah, and if you want to share a visual aid, I have you can do that.
Struck with Red by her musical career and also how her personal life panned out. So we're told that in 26 years she had performed in 146 cities, and she'd had over 1,000 concerts in Tamil-speaking region and about 849 concerts in Madras alone. Her singing was also much in demand in other Tamil-speaking cities, and she performed in Ceylon as well. And she struggled with carrying her tambura over long distances, and she designed her own portable instrument where the stalk and the keys could be dismantled. And she placed it horizontally next to her when she sang, but also told who her accompanying musicians were in her later life. The performances were much sought after by landlords in Tanjore at weddings and special occasions. These events also included dance, music, Nagaswaram, and Harikatha performances in mimicry. The Zamindars of Andhra also invited her, and she made routine visits to many of the Telugu-speaking princely families at this time. There's an account here of Unikunda and Venkatarama Iyer describing her performance in this excerpt here, where he describes what she sang and also the deviations she made, including the Pallavi, which was not previously sung by women. Displays the lineage of Tyagaraja canon in Carnatic music, and she had an extensive repertoire of his songs. Her concerts were characterized by banter and art. She was sardonic, and when she was not performing, she had a stream of visitors to her house who would come and ask her to sing their favorite songs. She also organized bhajans in her home. So here, an one person's views of just Nagaratha when she arrived at a temple for a festival. And we've given a painted picture of her being richly ornamented, being accompanied by servants, and about her voice and just the way she presented herself here. I mean, it's interesting the way she's characterized here versus in the previous chapter where Oriental scholars enters, they look at her as a prostitute, as someone who edited a book, which is content they judge based on just that distinction. Also here, reminded me of a contrast between last week when we read the first chapter of Muthulakshmi Reddy and the way caste dynamics were spoken of there, and the way that's characterized versus the way she's received in these performances, and the picture that this chapter paints for us here. So I also told you a little bit about her religious orientation, her pious nature, we're told about her daily puja that she does, and then we're told that she's made donations to many different temples, and she's built shelter for pilgrims. She also underprivileged children through their school and college, as well as donated towards their wedding expenses. And we're told that she develops a reputation of someone who's pious and so here we're told about her experience of having children. It's thought that she had a daughter who died young. She then adopts a child, but that does not go very well. She's told that this ends in an attempt by the child to poison her for her wealth. And then she settles on an agreement and rescinds this adoption. She then teaches she has a close acquaintance in the Risani Amma, who's a practitioner of the arts. And she teaches her third daughter, Elame Lungange Taya, who's also on Swanu Tai. She also provided a home to Subramanya Naidu, who was hopeful at that point to learn from Lina Dhammo. Later we're told that he goes on to establish a musical career for himself Subramania Pillai. She also identifies Kude Nayaki, a Brahmin girl, and she organizes performances for her both in Georgetown and in Mysore. It is not the norm for girls from Brahmin families to perform in public at this time, and we're told that this breaks convention. She had a variety of pets, dogs, a parrot, a number of animals who came, and we're told this was her way of coping with the loneliness of her situation, as well as a little bit of how her personality is characterized. Eventually, we're told that she purchases a picture of Tyagaraja and encases it in silver and leaf work. She offers prayers to this daily, and this becomes central to her. At this point, canonization of Tyagaraja's work is also taking place, and Harikatha on him becomes popular. We're told that she's influenced by books and Harikatha performances of him, and she becomes obsessed with him. 1921, she seems to have a vision of Tyagaraja in her sleep. And the very next day, she receives a letter from Vishnu lamenting on the condition of his samriddhi. And she calls on to the Swami Naidu and Nagaraja Bhagavatar to learn more information about this. So that's where this chapter is.
Thanks, Santosh and Lakshmi. So yeah, open to thoughts. So there was a couple of things, of course, for me, but I wanted to actually, one of the quotes that I thought was very timely was from chapter 3 of the Nagaratnama book, page 54, where, when there are the arguments that happen in favor of the book, right, Radhika Santvanamo. And there's something that I thought that was something that, was quite a timeless statement to make. So right at the top of page 54, it says, the products of an age and surroundings in which delicacy of sentiment and refinement of thought in the depiction of the sensuous were not what they are now, required to be according to the ideas of a class of puristic critics. And then it says a very interesting line, right? After all, there can be no absolute and inviolable standard of decency in the artistic treatment of human love. I thought that was a very, very, very insightful statement that also, is kind of a guideline for any artist, right? Anywhere in the world. And also in terms of how we view I think art that was created in the past versus art that is being created at present, and so on and so forth. So this ability to first separate out what was considered decent or not decent, right, in different parts of human existence, to view an art, first of all, from that, through that lens and the understanding of that lens. And it's, when there is an artistic treatment of human love, then there can be no inviolable standard of decency. I thought that was a very, very nice and interesting statement for me. Also in terms of quality of being able to judge a work, right? Because that also seems to be like almost like a training one needs to have to be able to assess, review, judge works, is actually not as simple as I think we make it out to be now. So that was for me an important quote that I had. Any other thoughts? Anything that, yes, my three people. Yeah.
I think what you said right now is also supported by the publisher who says he cannot retract or he cannot change from what he had presented in those publications. And I think that is another example of what we said just now. And from both the books, I think both these women, they were aware of their role as a responsible role model, and they took it seriously. They whether it is Muthulakshmi Reddy, who was an example, who led her family to get a better education, bringing everyone to Madras and making sure everybody got the education that she strived for. and as well as Nagaratna Mama, who wanted to promote her art and leave a legacy. Both of them, from the community that they come from, had different ideas of how they wanted to wanted their the people around them to move forward through them as a role model. So I found it very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I think from beginning from these chapters, a lot of parallels between the two women begin to show up, right? Which is also very interesting. Also, it just happens so in the way the chapters are penned. There's a very detailed description of the kind of people they looked up to. Who were the women that they looked up to was also a very interesting, comparison that sort of emerges. Yes. Absolutely.
And also, just as Muthulakshmi Reddy tries to raise Subbulakshmi, and at the same time, parallelly here, Nagaratna Mama also seeks to help grow the art through a child, and this happens around the same time as well. I mean, while reading. Yeah.
I also think that like the conversation about whose influence they each of these women take is really important, because when I was reading the Muthulakshmi Reddy, and I was there was the depiction of this Devadasi who had died by childbirth. You almost think of what Bangalore Nagaratnama's reaction to that scenario may have been. She might have then advocated for better healthcare, better a bettering of the community there. But instead, what Muthulakshmi Reddy took away from that is, oh, this Devadasi's her situation is the one that's putting her in these like is causing her to have these ill things happen to her, right? So I think it's you can see the way they analyze each situation, and then it's like they're in the same situations, but they analyze it differently based on who influences them. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that the takeaway for Muthulakshmi Reddy was that the Devadasi's way of life is the thing that's kind of spoiling their experience, whereas I would say that Bangalore Nagaratnama, if she had been in that situation, she may have seen it differently. So I think that's a thought that I had just written down while I was reading. So
sorry if I can interrupt you. I Okay. I also read about a point that Nagaratnama was very insisting of her teaching her own lineage, only the people she comes from her community, but not accepting any other people from, even for the matter of fact, the Brahmin family. She was not supportive of their performing arts, except for the ladies that's talked about.
And so, sorry, is there an observation you're making about that point, or just pointing out that was
pointing out, but then she doesn't want to take the art forward apart from the community. Even though there were other female artists from other community, but very few of them. But she was a bit conservative towards other people not performing.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to loop back to what Mitra, what you pointed out, right? What I feel is perhaps, maybe we're just too early on in the narrative to understand those extrapolations better, because you're right. For me also, it seemed like the extrapolation at this point to say, oh, okay, it is the Devadasi system that, is responsible for this ill, because my understanding is that women in general got married very young back then, and the access to healthcare, is particularly from the point of view of, delivery of a baby, was anyway quite poor, right? So that must have been the status of any 16-year-old girl who was married, nevertheless. But I'm hoping that those connections of why certain things are being said will become more clear later on, because there was also one mention in this chapter which talked about how her mother had fought very hard to extricate herself from the system. And that was also a sentence that was left unqualified for me, because of course we know very little about her mother from these last two chapters, at least in terms of what's built up. So, but that was just a point to take note of, saying that, okay, how did she extricate herself? Or, what was her personal struggle, right? Because that's not something that we've gone into as yet. But yeah, I'm hoping those connections will begin to reveal themselves going forward.
Can I add to that? That's what I also felt. Muthulakshmi had this gender neutral environment while growing up. Her mom was also somehow did not dedicate her kids. From that one sentence, I imagined that. I don't know later what happens. She did not dedicate her kids for the Devadasi system, and also her father. He supported the family, and also he did not say that, okay, I'm a man and I will not cook and I will not look after the kid when she is learning or something. So I thought that gender neutral household somehow fertilized her way of thinking and other stuff, which gave her the courage and the grit which is needed to do the things what she has done. And also I thought the gender and the race, how it played in their career, both the Nagaratama and Muthulakshmi, because she came back to Madras because the nurses were treating her ill because of the race. That's what it says in one of the sentences. And also Nagaratnama, she took up the literary work from the community, and it is somehow felt for me as though if the male has written it, it would have been okay. If the female is telling that, okay, this is what I want, this is what I need, then it is not okay for the society. That is what I felt while reading. So they are so insecure about the one gender's pointing their point of view. That's what I felt.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, this there was also something I just want to add to what you said. That one, it makes one wonder what or when was there necessarily a shift in society, right, over time, which made it more, where the division in labor or work was becoming more specific, or where respect according to, right? Because that seemed clear from certain statements that were also made about the British medical practitioners. Like there was a Britisher making this comment about a British woman taking up medicine. So being very skeptical about women coming into certain spheres. But from that perspective, there was another thing that caught my eye on page 44 of the Nagaratnama book, where it talks about how Mudduparni how do you say, acknowledges her own self in the original manuscript. I thought that was fantastic, because it says, she's waxing eloquent about the fact that there are epics that are dedicated to her, that she is no less than, a man who may have done the same thing. And he adds at the end, which is something that I found very interesting. What is even more interesting is that this assertion of status is not labored, but emerges very naturally, a clear indication of perfect self-assurance and confidence, right? And just makes one wonder whether she was just a special, woman who lived in her times, Mudduparni herself, or whether it was more common for, once again, women of that community who were contributing to, social life in a very different way, to just have that, that sense of self-worth and self-assurance more naturally. But definitely, I think the gender dynamic.
sorry, if anyone knows how to read Telugu, there is a free PDF available in open source. Yeah, but I'm not, I can't read, unfortunately. If you want, you can just Google it, you get a PDF of the literary work. And I can only imagine by the reviews what I have read about the book, that if anyone has the courage right now to write that kind of a work, I'm sure there will be halagulla. For sure, there will be controversy.
I just wanted to add, which also caught my attention, as to um, who decides, what is the logic behind deciding how these books get seized, written by in such contexts, or if there have been, then who decides that? So there is a sense even in 51 as a sense of questioning the logic as to who decides it. But I couldn't find an answer to the decision, to that kind of a discussion that's coming forward. But yeah, I found that very interesting in that question mark that came in from Nagat Mama's book. It's in page 51.
I just hope one day we see art without the gender, without the race or anything, to understand it first. Later we will review it. That's what I feel. To answer your question, that's what I think.
I wonder one thing when you were talking about the mention on page 51, where you see, like, it's because the Veera Salingam was a man. They like removed all his references to his name and everything when they were prosecuting, or when they were banning the book, because they didn't want to like sour his name. So I kind of wonder why the author of the Radhika Santwanamu was cited as a man, because it's like, wouldn't they have more? It's almost like they want to cover up their real intentions behind censoring this book, because it's kind of obvious that because the author was a woman, they probably had more bias and one wanted to censor it. But I think to the public outside, that's why they probably changed it. They cited it as a man, so that they kind of say, oh, everything is on equal standing, but we are still trying to censor this thing. So I thought that was interesting. So, and also just discrediting the fact that a woman could even write a book like this. It's like considered on the level of all these other male authors. So just kind of trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, and I think it also very clearly gives us a sense of, what erasures in history can look like, right? Because to me, what was incredible was, of course, the republishing of the book was a huge step by Bangalore Nagaratnamal. But to start with, forget getting that far even, but even clarifications, right, that she's making in public forums, saying that this is not a man, this is a woman writer, and this person is not from this lineage, is from this lineage. So even factual corrections to know the, like you said, the existence of a woman, writer of that stature in itself, and how easily something could be, I think gives us a sense of how easily something can be lost or misrepresented in history. And, we'd probably never, it makes me wonder how much like that is misrepresented, right? And where we don't get to track it down to its source. But yeah.
the development of the obscenity and laws surrounding the morality of books is quite interesting. I just found like an article. I had like 2 articles on how that developed in India and how the banning of books and how this relates to like obscenity laws and how that's generally progressed discussion if that is generally progressed. So I found that a little bit interesting. So I'll just share that.
With respect to that particular misrepresentation as a man, Mitha also makes me wonder whether it is necessarily a calculated move, or it's like transcribing errors as well, right? But where you just the person who is making this list says, well, oh no, that can't be right, cannot be a woman, maybe that was a mistake or whatever, right? By force of habit, is represented as a man versus it being maybe a very calculated move to show that they're being fair,
I think there's also that mention there. Nagaratna Mama also mentions that if you look at books, no books without errors can be, including the Mahabharatam by itself. So in that case, surprisingly, there are mistakes in the work of a woman as well. So it's quite interesting how she brings Bharatamu within that context, and she speaks about, if you look closely, there are errors within them as well. So yeah.
I wonder with regard to the ban, how much of this was the gender dynamic that was playing in, and how much it was with her critiquing Reddy Silingam's previous, like his previous publication, because he clearly was quite an influential player there. So, I mean, that choice that she made there, I wonder how much that played into the discussion versus generally her being a woman and being from this community.
I think the one other common factor that jumped out at me from like reading both these chapters parallelly was somewhere, at least, and if any of you thought differently, please correct me. But the sensibility that I got, that somehow there doesn't seem to be an intrinsic divide in society, right? Whether we're looking at the support for this book, for instance, for Radhika Santwanamo, there are voices in support, right? Rational voices in support, and there are voices of dissent. But these voices don't necessarily belong to a particular caste or a class, right? And it's the same that for me, jumped out from Muthulakshmi Reddy also. There are, while there are equally well British men who are commenting on a very, in a gender biased way, but there are British men and professors who are the people who encourage her, right? And likewise with the Indian community as well. So interesting to understand, or maybe going forward, that's also one thing that I want to look out for, to say when did this perhaps evolve into a little bit more of a class or a caste biased sort of a, divide. And how did that happen? Why did that happen? Because it's very clear from the, the sort of the very anchored support to the book's publication doesn't come from a particular community or a caste, right? Or doesn't, and of course, even the gender bias doesn't exist within that, sort of voices of support and dissent that at least that are represented to us in the book. So when did this evolve into a more, a caste or a class biased argument, or a face off between? So that's something that I definitely would like to look out for in the upcoming chapters.
I think when it's ironic that when we read these two books, if we hadn't read it at the same time, we wouldn't think to connect of their actions being corresponding to them coming from the Devadasi community itself. I think sometimes people just started reading into things when people had similar opinions, and it might not have been intentional for them per se, but the coincidence could have been read into, and so it started to become a community thought process, and might not have been intentional, is what I think.
Interesting, like in one statement with Venkataraman Rao, he writes in defense of the publication of the book. And then he says the original book was an adaptation of a Sanskrit poem, Radha Madhava Sambadamu. And he goes on to say it has Puranic origin and it's immortalized in Sanskrit lyrics such as Gita Govinda and by Jayadeva. And he goes on to mention people who've translated the poetry and other dimensions. I wonder if this was the original intention when Muthulakshmi wrote the book, or if this was a defense that was necessary at this point of time to try and protect the morality of to defend the book.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely salient point there as to whether it's the kind of arguments that were making sense to the people in power, right? So you speak the language that they understand, because that also takes me back to, the reading that we did in the previous cycle, where the representation that was made by the Devadasis in that entire legal representation, there are a lot of arguments that, instead of simply stating we're a legitimate professional practice, there is a lot of reference to so-called morality and so-called, it's only some of us who have, lost that sense of, which already seemed to me coming very far away from someone like Muthulakshmi, who just claims to be what she is, with a great degree of pride. I also actually, let me try and, I think I had so there's also something that Nagaratnama herself says so this is on page 48, where she talks about, how, terming a woman from the Devadasi community as an adulteress, because an adulteress was a woman who, having married a man with fire as witness, eloped with another, while a Devadasi, the divine handmaiden, could not be termed so. Such terms as chastity, according to her, did not apply to her community, as was clear to anyone who had read the Kama Sutra. Her community was ordained to perform this task as a duty as per divine command. So there again, I found that like there was a lot of mixed messaging for me in that paragraph, and I wonder whether these kind of statements saying that it's divine command that this is the duty that we fulfill was it not also just the way in which a large part of India thought about the work that they did, right? No matter what work you did, it is actually a very modern way of thinking in India to say, okay, you know what, I made a choice, I'm being trained in this, and I want to do this because of a certain end, versus many professions which were hereditary, many professions which were taken on when you were much younger because your father did it or your mother did it and so on. And because you would definitely find many artistic practices where it was always considered a divine sort of a how do you say, a calling for them, that they were responding by doing this, not owning what it is that you do and saying it's what comes through me and not what I do. Is it from that perspective that she makes the statement of it being a divine command, or does it again sort of is it leaning towards the kind of arguments one needs to make in that time to find legitimacy within the social system? So that's, that for me, that paragraph was a bit confusing in terms of what is the tone I'm taking away from this, right? Because it's one thing to say a concept like chastity does not apply to my community. That's a very different statement from, at least the way I, from my space, understand something like being ordained by divine command to follow a certain beauty. Reads very differently to the modern mind, I feel. So any thoughts on that? I don't know if that struck any of you.
And also, it is not just the art which was practiced as hereditary. I think the kingdom or the ruler, whoever born in that community, they continued to be on the this one, right? They did not have the authority to say, okay, I don't like this duties and I don't want to do it. So I think the society back then. I think the political scenes right now is also it is like the same. The family rules it. So I don't know whether it has changed or anything. I think back then the way of thinking was also different to understand exactly how to interpret that paragraph. I was also wondering, okay, what this paragraph means exactly.
I don't know if it reflects with Muthupalani's writing as well, when how she looked at Krishna, or how she gave the image to Krishna, which was quite interesting to what Apuraka just pointed out on that paragraph, which said uh, that's how it was for them. Like that was a part of their connection with the divine as well. Uh, their relationship with it. So within how she would have thought of the writing, it wouldn't have meant anything erotic within that sense for her, because um, it wouldn't. I don't know if she would have thought it writing about Krishna within that space, or was that the relationship that she had. Sometimes you just can't, if you look at the space of Devadasi, then I don't know, it's just my thought of thinking, like, what was had that relationship with him been so strong that the way they imagined Krishna, or the way the love towards Krishna was not just about yearning for Krishna, but I think also about how she probably looked at the lens of writing this. I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but I'm just kind of uh, I don't know. I felt that if her writing had something that led towards this verses as well, and did she not consider it? How did she kind of think of her writing then?
I have a question there, though. I mean, once again, I don't know. I do know when I am very biased by whatever, like a modern way of thinking about something. But look at both the titles of the pieces, right? One is the what was the English translation of Santvanamu? The reconciliation of Radha, whatever, appeasement of Radha. Appeasement of Radha, right? And the other one was that Ila. Sorry, I'm losing the. There was another title, right, for the original work, of alternate title, which was Ila something.
Illa Deivamu, Deviyamu, Illa Deviyamu.
Yeah, but both, both the titles hold the female characters in the work as titular characters. My question is, was Krishna incidental to this whole thing? They lived lives where they were very central to their lives. The women were very central to their lives, and the desires of the woman, her capability perhaps for a certain way of being. Is it about Krishna at all, or is it
Yeah, that's a point I didn't think about but now for Santoshaka's point, I was thinking, like, because they're servants of God, right? So their relationship to God is a lot different than even the other people who are just going to the temple to worship him, right? Like, for them, God is like their partner, so they can find they can still be in love and admire him, but they can find faults with things, like, the way they um uh make love and things like that, like, in more intimate ways, because God is their partner. So that's why I think, they have the liberty to kind of critique Krishna in these kind of ways, because that's the nature of their relationship with him. And I would argue that it's even closer, like it's even closer to relationship than what, just devotees had with Krishna. But to your point of, like, is it even about Krishna at all? It's like, that's also another consideration. Like, are they just writing about themselves and then Krishna is like a side character kind of? Because, so that's also yeah, I'm not sure about that one, but
I think the context of love sometimes, I don't know, it's just trying to answer in that. Love always being associated with the image of Krishna. I don't know if that was something that led to Krishna being the central figure in the context of love. But yeah, just a thought. But yeah, that's a very valid thinking as to why did Krishna become the central figure if it was about perspective within the
I was just wondering, do we know whether the Palani was dedicated at a temple at all? Because we're told she's a court dancer and that she's a courtesan in Pratapisima's court. And I've read elsewhere those gestures by the Vishsamiji where he gives that any of the court dancers, like the process of tying that, being married to the deity, it did always occur in a temple. Sometimes it was done to a sword, right down in a setting like in the court, which meant that they were free to be with any man, but not necessarily married to the deity itself. So maybe the very perception of her as married to God or having that relationship, that just makes me curious what that would be like for her. So the way this author introduces the way Muthulakshmi represents her, she traces her lineage, matrilineal lineage of who she is, and speaks about her prowess in the arts, and that's her identity and she goes. She doesn't make a religious reference saying, I'm dedicated to this temple, to this deity, or I'm doing it in service of God. It seems to have come in, though, when Nagaratna makes the statement, she says, we're in service of God, or at God's command, we're doing this. That's the role. But then the contrast with Muthulakshmi itself, she doesn't seem to make that statement.
Yeah, that's interesting, because understanding this ordainment or the dedication in the, through this sort of ritual, is something that, this sort of idea of having a ritual that was a rite of passage, right? That sort of prepared you for something, or now officially proclaimed that you are ready for something, I think has existed in multiple disciplines and in different ways. That ritual just was very different in different disciplines. And, the fact of, that's interesting. Like, does she not refer back to it because she was a courtesan, or rather like a, someone who, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, that's something that we should see if we can find other sources to check on, because yeah, the reason why there may or may not be a reference, definitely you're talking about two very different timelines here, right? That has to be taken into factor. And also, yeah, who are the people that you're talking to? Because neither did Nagaratnam, for that matter, ever sing or dance in a temple. Her entire life, she has not done that. She's done it, danced or performed in concert centers, or to the court musicians or to the connoisseurs, so to say. So, but we somehow, of course, we have a knowledge of the fact that she, at least her mother, was right, dedicated to that particular temple in Nanjangoodu, but it doesn't actually say, she was too young when they left that place, and there is no mention of Nagaratnam actually going through that ritual anywhere here either. So, was it just a way of induction into that professional practice, or was this concept of being married to, God, a very big part of how they conducted themselves. Yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts? I just noticed that we're at 9:40. So maybe if there are any closing thoughts with, where we stand so far with the 4 chapters of this book and 2 chapters of the other, we can take them and then we can round it off. Any last thoughts to share today? Okay, so maybe a good point for us to bring the meeting itself to a close. But once again, like Santosh had put out in the chat, anybody who would be happy to, willing to lead a summary of any one of the chapters next week, please reach out to us. We'd love for you, for another member of the group to lead the summary. That would be fantastic. And also for us to keep the discussions alive even outside of this group. So if there's anything that occurs to you, or if you are also picking up references, that would be interesting for other people to look at, please feel free to share it on the WhatsApp group. We will go ahead and share the blog ID with you, so you can look at everything that at least last week, whatever we discussed. From a reference point of view. Of course, we've not represented the various thoughts that came up in the discussion, but it's just the summary along with other reading and resources that we were able to find. But we'd be very happy to embellish that set of resources with anything that you've looked at that is not there. So thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to next week. Bye.